Hello, and welcome to the second installment of my limited series, Monday Memories. You send in your questions, and I'll answer them. I'll also, at the top of the show, be picking a piece of memorabilia from my very large 60-year-old collection of memorabilia and memories that I store in a warehouse in an undisclosed location. And I'm going to show it to you. And actually, I have one such item right here. This is a very rare little box of Bruce juice. Yes, it's WNEWFM, New York City Bruce juice. We were playing a show, I guess it was in the 70s. It might have even been The Bottom Line in 1975. And they gave these out, and they had orange juice in them. And I got one. I drank the orange juice and kept the box. So that was a long time ago, folks. So you've got down here 100% rock and roll. Over here on the side, it has the members of the band: Roy Bittan, Clarence Clemens, Dan Federici, Bruce Springsteen, Gary Talent, Steve Van Zandt, and me, your host, Max Weinberg. Yeah, this was a pretty nice little item here. Over here it says, "This ride is free, Rosie." So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. Last week was really a blast for me. I had a great time, and I loved getting your comments afterwards. So keep those comments coming. Keep your questions coming, and I'll do my best to answer them. Before we get started, I want to offer a correction. That's right, a correction from me. I was wrong. Richard Schwarz of Maryland posted a comment after an answer that I gave and corrected me, because his question was, were there ever any Bruce and the E Street Band shows that were canceled or postponed because of injury or illness to an E Street Band member? And I said, I don't think so. And you know, when you watch me on stage, you can see I'm watching Bruce. I never take my eyes off of Bruce. So it's not surprising that I wouldn't have noticed. But Richard was absolutely right. There was a time when Clarence had an eye injury and we postponed the show. We did make it up. And there was another time when Patty had this very painful broken eardrum, and we had to postpone a show. So yes, indeed, there were two such instances, Richard, of an E Street Band member being down for a very short count and coming back and playing a hell of a rock and roll show. So if you tuned in last week, you recognize this. This was the 12 by 15 inch tom-tom, Ludwig tom-tom. Actually, in the 60s when I got it in 1968, it was called the Carmine A Piece drum set. And he used this as a rack tom, that little small tom that sits on top of the bass drum. He didn't use this one, but he was a hero of mine, so I emulated him and got that drum set. And I think it cost $485. Manny's Music in New York. And I got this, and for years I used it. And there's a lot of old pictures of me with my younger bands, but when I got with Bruce, I converted it into a floor tom-tom. And this is the drum that I used on the River album, the Born in the USA album. So when you hear me playing songs like Stolen Car with that very mysterious whoom in the background, that's this drum. I'm a Rocker, dun, 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 dun. That's this drum. Today I'm going to use, as I did last week, I'm going to use this drum as my sort of lottery wheel. You know, they turn it and you pick a number out. Well, instead of the number, I'm going to toss these questions into the drum, and then I'll pick them, and then I'll answer them. So let's get to it. All right. Let's see. First question. Well, this must be a coincidence. This is from Jane Van Zandt. Maybe a relation, maybe not. I don't know. She wants to know. That's a good one. What does it feel like the morning after the first night of the tour? Well, I can tell you it feels exhilarating right after you play, because you've geared up a couple weeks of rehearsals maybe, and then you play the show, and you realize how damn hard it is to get through that show. And when people ask me what I feel like the morning after a show, first show or 100th show, I refer them to the movie North Dallas 40, where Nick Nolte is the quarterback and he's getting out of the bed in the morning. He pulls himself out of bed. That's about what it's like for me, because it does take every ounce of my strength to play a show with Bruce and the E Street Band. They could be 2 hours and 45 minutes, 3:15, 3:45, in some cases more than 4 hours. And I don't leave anything on the stage. I put it all out there. I feel it the next day for a couple of hours, but I have a whole routine to get back in shape to do it again. Thank you, Jane. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, this is from Will in C from Seattle, Washington. Just played up there recently with my jukebox band. The album Max Weinberg 7 is one of my favorite albums of all time. Any chance of you doing that type of album again? Well, that's what we call a limited sale. The Max Weinberg 7 record, which was released, I think, in 1999, when I first rejoined the E Street Band. And actually, we did it. It was a lot of fun. In case I went away, it didn't come back. This was my way of making a statement as to what that band was doing after 6 years on TV. And the guys in the band, from Jimmy Vivino and his brother Jerry, to Mark Pender on trumpet, Richie La Bamba Rosenberg, Mike Merritt on bass, Scott Healy on piano, and keyboards, and everything else that everybody else didn't play. I got to give them a lot of thanks, because night after night for years and years and years, they brought it to that stage. And drummers can't do it alone, so I want to thank the 6 members of the Max Weinberg 7 for always playing great, and for playing particularly great on that record. And as a matter of fact, the cover of that record, we were going through a lot of iterations of the dancers. And we wanted a shoe to be prominent of the woman dancer. And at first it was sort of like a platform boot. And then it was a shoe with a thick heel. And I showed it to my wife and she said, oh, no, you got to get a stiletto heel. So Becky said, yeah, you got to get a stiletto heel, because a stiletto heel on a dancer like that means business. So thanks to Becky, that was the cover of the record. Okay, let's see what we have here. Well, another post-related show. This is from Vicki Workman of Holly Springs, North Carolina. How do you wind down after a show? After a 3-hour E Street Band show, is there a routine to help your body recover and be able to play again the next night? Well, yes, there is, hot bath. So we leave the stage right after we play, and we get into Econoline vans, if you know what I'm talking about, and we usually either go on to the next city or we might go back to the hotel. Immediately, I stick my hands in ice water. You've seen pictures of me do that, because in the 80s, I had 10 operations on my hands to relieve the pain of extreme tendonitis. And so what I do is I warm up very thoroughly before the show. I work out on a bicycle, a recumbent bicycle, to get my heart rate up. So by the time I hit the stage, I'm sweating already. I practice on a drum pad for about 20-25 minutes to get the blood flowing in my arms. And even doing all of that first 1, 2, 3, 4, you are transported into another world. And then you give your all for 3-4 hours, whatever it might be, whatever Bruce decides. So afterwards, I put my hands in ice. The first thing I do when I get back to my room, for example, if I'm going back to the hotel, is I take a really hot shower for a really long time. And then usually, because I'm getting up at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's dinner, because I'll go to bed at 4:30. So I'll get that hot shower. I'll get one of those really soft, downy, luxurious robes that they don't want you to steal from the hotel, which I don't. Wrap myself in that robe, get a nice bottle of red, a Cabernet, perhaps an amusing Chianti. I'll have 2 glasses of wine, and I usually have a big salad with something like cooked shrimp, maybe some chicken, and that's about it. And I will get into a habit sometimes of watching all the old Superman episodes from the first one to the last, or Gunsmoke, or Bonanza. They're fun and they relax me. And then, I'll fall asleep 4:30 or 5 and do it all again. So thanks for that question. All right, here we go. Shawn Simon's from Washington, D.C. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't preview those, so these questions, I don't preview them, I just pull them out of the drum. As Bruce selects signs from the crowd, what's one song you definitely would not want on there, and why? Well, Shawn, that's an interesting question. There isn't a song Bruce will spontaneously pick or even plan to pick that I'm not ready to play. That's the job. I don't get to pick the songs, but I get to play them to the best of my ability whenever I can get the opportunity. So there's never been a song that I'm going, I can't play that. I will figure out a way to play it. I may never have played it. I may never have heard it. But after 46 years of playing with Bruce and the E Street Band, we have our thing down. We've been practicing a long time by all the shows that we've done and you've come to. So even if I don't know the exact arrangement, I kind of intuitively know the moves to make. And, in Europe they started holding up those signs on one of the tours in the 2000s. And we started playing them. And at first it started at Bruce's songs. And then it was other people's songs. And then it was very obscure songs. It became a question of Stump the Band, which used to be a staple of late night TV. And I have a really good memory. It's just a thing. I have a really good memory. And one thing we all have in the E Street Band is common musical roots. So if you're going to play a Mitch Ryder song, a Rolling Stone song, a Hollies song, or a Manfred Mann song, or any song that might have occurred to us in our youth, we're pretty much able to play it. Let's see. All right. When did you start playing, and who was your teacher? Mine was Elliot Fine. I also wonder what childhood or teenage songs bring back certain memories for you and why. That's from Jay Schneider from Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Well, Jay, first I'll answer your second question. Every time I turn on Little Steven's Underground Garage, or the 60s channel, the 50s, the 40s, all these songs evoke in me a memory, just like they do for you. When I hear 19th Nervous Breakdown by the Rolling Stones, I see myself sitting in the 5th row of the Mosque Theater in Newark, New Jersey in November of 1965, watching the Rolling Stones with Brian Jones and his white teardrop guitar playing 19th Nervous Breakdown. And by the way, 19th Nervous Breakdown was the first song that I ever sang with a band. I sang it with my band. I love that song. It starts with the drums, so I sang it. So the first part of your question is, my drum teacher was a lovely gentleman who I met when I was in 4th grade. His name was Gene Thaler, and he remained a lifelong friend of mine. He taught in New Jersey, then he moved to Hollywood, Florida, and taught there for many, many years. And I could never call him Gene, because I met him when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I was starting to get really serious about the drums. And he was always Mr. Thaler. And I always used to, he taught in his basement, and he had this beautiful black classic Rogers drum set. And I didn't have a drum set at that point. So once a week I got to play on his drum set after I did all my rudiments on a pad. And I remember I used to love to play for people. I was unabashed, not shy, but I couldn't stand to have people watch me practice. I got very shy, nervous, and anxious about people seeing me, sort of seeing the sausage being made. So my lessons were always 6 o'clock on Friday night, because I was the last lesson of the week. And I made sure, I waited in his living room, I made sure that, thinking back to it, it's kind of funny, but that, here I am still playing drums at the age of 69, but back then I would play my butt off in front of you in a show, but practicing, I had to do that by myself. Thanks for that question. let's see. The famous talk you and Bruce had in 1979. Yes, I've talked about it, and it was a life-changing experience for me, and in many ways it was my true rock and roll bar mitzvah at the age of 28. Apparently he was unhappy with something about your drumming, and you took lessons to correct it. What was it, and can you point to a place in the song that shows how you fixed it? Well, I wouldn't say it was an unhappiness, but during the recording of the, it's a long answer to this, but I'm going to abridge it for you so I can answer your question. Because as you see, they come up in no particular order. During the making of the River album, we were doing many, many takes, 20 takes of something that's with different lyrics and different arrangements. And most drummers peak around the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh take. And then you get maybe a little tired or whatever it was. Plus we were recording 6 o'clock at night to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So sometimes that instability on the drums would show up on a track. And it did show up, I guess you could call the straw that broke the camel's back. And it was a changing point in my life, it really was. And I have to thank my wife Becky, who was just an absolute rock supporting me in the endeavor to become a better drummer in 1979 forward for about 5-6 years. But it showed up in the song Out in the Street, where from section to section it was a little bumpy. It was a bumpy ride. It wasn't smooth. Transitions weren't smooth. And Bruce did take me out into the lobby of the power station on 53rd Street, where we were making the River album. And he was great. He said, a lot of takes, and a lot of bands don't do it that way. That's how I work. And he suggested I was making friends in the business of studio drummers like Hal Blaine, Jim Keltner, Russ Kunkel, dear friends that became dear friends of mine who were fantastic drummers. And it was sort of the moment where I had to grow up and be a man as a drummer. And Bruce was very gentle with me. He was very understanding. He believed I could do it, he said. He knew that I had it in me to do it, but I had to address the issue. And that was it. It was, 2 minutes. I got the message. And immediately after that, we went into the studio and recorded the song Be True. And right away, I was 50% better because I was aware of the issue. And the story of how I worked my way back from the darkness, literally, during that recording of the River album. We had about another year of recording to go. Well, that's for another time and place, but I will get into all the details. But I did grow up on the drums. Okay, this is from Jeff Calloway of Fort Worth, Texas. In the Blood Brothers documentary, we see Bruce showing the members of the band how he wanted their respective parts played. How do you find the balance of getting what's in Bruce's head while keeping the freedom you all have as incredibly, thank you, Jeff, incredibly talented musicians? It's a fantastic balance of, A, you know what Bruce wants. After 46 years, we all know how to get there. He may have a specific riff, or for example, in the song, as I explained last week, Roulette, he had a specific drum beat he wanted to hear. He'll tell you that. But then it's a pleasure recording because he leaves you up to your own devices. You can throw your musical 2 cents into the mix. If he doesn't like it, he'll tell you, work something else out, try something else. But the whole thing is you want to have the freedom to be able to experiment, whether it's with Bruce or any of the records I've played on, or just generally in creating music, while at the same time having that moment-to-moment inspiration intersect with a good amount of precision and finesse. And, we hadn't played together at that point for the Blood Brothers recordings we did in video since 1988. That was 95, so that's quite a long time. And we just went in to the studio, and it was like that. We were back. There was actually even no cobwebs to shake off, because we had done so much playing. It was great fun. It was great to play again. It was 2 weeks of, I was doing the late night program, go over to the west side and do the session. And there was a lot of creativity, a lot of jokes. A lot of jokes, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of all the old stories came out. And those aren't in the Blood Brothers video. But that's how we did it, you know, and it's still, even when we're on tour, whatever we might be recording at any time, it's still, well, here's the riff, here's basically the song. We all have our little shortcuts. Through the 17 years I worked on late night television, I was able to, you know, really become adept at reading music. So I'll be able to write out all my parts and follow that as a roadmap. But of course, even when you're recording with Bruce, he may change something as you're doing it. So while you have a roadmap, you don't want to miss your exit, if you know what I mean. Did I ever say no to any of the bits I was asked to do on the late night program on NBC? If so, what did they want you to do? This is by John Wagner. John asked this question about my TV career. And I hope some of you out there saw the years that I was on Late Night with Conan O'Brien and did almost, I think, 4,000 shows, something like that. But no, I actually never said no. Although one time, it wasn't that I said no, but they had a bit they wanted me to do, and it involved getting caught, as they say, in flagrante delicto with a young woman, and they wanted to use a model, and they sent me the script. I was in Florida on vacation. This is when Conan was hosting Saturday Night Live, and they needed a what we call it's the end of a bit. A bit is a sketch. A beat is an individual element, and we needed a little button at the end of it. They needed a final joke. So they had this idea of me with this young lady, and they picked out a model. I said, you know, it's a funny bit. I don't think I can do that. And I wouldn't have done that. But I called Becky, and she said, well, I'll do it. And Becky's gorgeous. So I called them back. I said, yeah, I'll do it. You know, Becky volunteered to do it, and they said, yeah, that'll work. That'd be great. So Becky and I did it, and I'm sure it's on YouTube. It was when Conan hosted SNL in the mid-late 90s, I believe. Maybe it was the 2000s. He takes a tour through the NBC studios and ends up in our studio, 6A. So check that out. Here it is from Brian King. And he lives in Dallas. When performing live with E Street, is the tempo throughout a song dictated by you or by Bruce's leg? Interesting question, Brian. The tempo, we have a range. And in certain songs, Darkness on the Edge of Town, Atlantic City, they're all in the low 90s if you wanted to put figure out the beat with the use of a metronome. And then we play Promised Land in the 116, 114, depending on the night. So Bruce has an incredible sense of where to count off the song. And very often I'll give him the tempo by clicking the sticks, which makes it a little easier because, as he has said to me, he's always thinking 2 songs ahead to tailor the concert to the exact audience we're playing for. And so when you come to see Bruce and the E Street Band playing, you're not seeing what we did, 20 shows ago. You're seeing something that's happening live right in front of you in real time. And we've kind of gotten a kick out of, there are some bands out there who have what we call laminated set lists. They actually do. They have a laminated card, like a pass, where they have all the important phone numbers of tour personnel, and on the other side they have the set list. We don't have a laminated set list. And so you want to play the tempo for the singer, where it's comfortable for the singer. So after doing 46 years of shows pretty much with Bruce, it's a balance between his foot, because he'll sing in one tempo, for example, and like all of us, he'll kind of move around, which might be in a different tempo. So it's a balance, but I usually go by his guitar and where he's putting the downbeat. But my job is he sets the tempo, I hold the tempo. And for any drummers out there, that is the job. If you're setting the tempo, you hold it. If you're not setting the tempo and someone else is counting it off or giving you the tempo announcement, your job, before anything else, and the drummers that I admire do this to the nth degree, Al Jackson from Stax, Jim Keltner, as I mentioned. Hold the tempo, and that's the job of the drummer. All right, I see we've got a few more questions in this, our second installment. This is from Tom Fitzgerald of Washington, D.C. This is a great question. You and Vinny Mad Dog Lopez, my predecessor with Boom Carter between us, have such different drumming styles. When you first joined the E Street Band, did you try to fit into his style for songs from the first two albums, or did you just do your own thing? Well, everyone in the E Street Band does Bruce's thing to the best of their ability on their instrument. But that's an interesting question, because my first job was to learn those songs. And I had no real experience with Bruce and the E Street Band, which is another long story. I was in a band that opened to Bruce at Seton Hall University, and I got sick during our second set, and I left right after the opening song. And the opening song in those days was Davy Sanchez playing New York City Serenade, and I left in the middle of his big opening solo, so I never actually got to see Bruce, because it was David opening the show. But when listening to all the stuff that Vinny did, I love Vinny's drumming. Vinny's drumming was just so heartfelt, spontaneous, reflective of the time period, and the sort of, and Bruce has said it himself, they were kind of like a street corner, almost folk kind of band. And Vinny's style fit really well into the madness of those early songs. So I did try to channel that energy, and certainly some of the licks. In fact, I still do. There are things in Incident on 57th Street where Vinny goes bump, 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 bump. Well, I'll throw those in just as a sort of tip of the hat to Vinny on those first two records. And but I do remember learning the Sandy and thinking to myself, well, as a drummer, I didn't know Vinny at that point. As a drummer, it goes back and forth, that song, Sandy, 4th of July, Asbury Park, from straight time to cut time. And I suggested to Bruce, you know, these two sections, if I was making this record, I would have just continued the straight beat. He goes, well, try that. Let me hear what it sounds like. This was in our second or third rehearsal. And I did it. And he goes, yeah, do that. So that's the kind of thing it's always been. But, there's a well-known story that I and others have told about Born to Run, which was Boom Carter's only song that he recorded with Bruce. It's a good one to debut on. That little hi-hat thing he does in the middle, I can do it now, but I never did it then. And I still don't do it because that's Boom Carter. He was a great fusion jazz drummer, still is. And that was his little funky soul thing he threw in there, which I don't do because I leave it to that little section totally for Bruce, for Boom. But with Bruce, I basically play the songs as they are on the record. Rosalita, I changed up a little bit. Bruce wanted to hear a Latin beat on the bell of the cymbal in the chorus, so I did that. So that's how they all came about. I certainly tip my hat to Vinny Lopez and Boom Carter, Ernie Boom Carter, for paving the way for the changes that came in the rhythm section for the E Street Band. What led you to use the giant rototoms on the Darkness on the Edge of Town sessions, and did they ever reappear? This is from Adam Hindle. Interesting question. The only time I ever used rototoms, which was a drum invention in the 70s, where they were sort of like a timpani, and you could go tune them by turning the rim instead of the little screws. And it was sort of a gimmick, and they actually worked, because we always had a hard time getting these big thundering toms. And I read an interview somewhere where Hal Blaine used these on the Beach Boys album that came out, I think in '76, 15 Big Ones. So I figured if it was good enough for Hal Blaine, certainly good enough for me. So I got these rototoms. And they actually worked. There were three of them. Do-do-doom, do-do-doom, do-do-doom. And there's a song, for example, I'm thinking of Don't Look Back, which was during those sessions, where I used those three toms. And there's pictures of me playing them, and they were real thin. I still have them. They're in my storage place. Only used them on that record, and they actually did give us the sound we wanted. But nope, the rototoms never made a reappearance. So I think we have time for two more questions. And I got a bunch here, so we're going to pick it up next week as well. Stuart Burson from Ottawa, Canada. Stuart wants to know if I can talk about my experience performing in East Germany before the fall of the Berlin Wall, which of course, as everyone knows, happened in 1989. We were booked to play West Berlin on the Tunnel of Love tour. I think it was around May, it was in the spring, probably May of '88. And I believe it was Bruce who said, you know, we're in West Berlin playing, and it was a smaller sort of outdoor amphitheater in a park. Why don't we do a big free concert in East Berlin? See if we could do it, for one thing. I don't think anybody had ever done that. And we did do it, and we traveled, and I have video of this, a lot of video of us traveling at Checkpoint Charlie to go to East Berlin, where they have the mirrors under the bus, and we were all on the bus. And it was a life-changing experience to spend 2 days in East Berlin. And when you were there for 2 days, you could tell, you really could feel that communism was not going to work and wasn't working. It was bleak, it was dark, it was really the darkness on the edge of Berlin at the time. People lining up for hours to buy 2 or 6 eggs in a store. Very clean. Remember, it was very, very, very clean. Very controlled, very militaristic, and people obviously didn't have free will. We played to a concert that was in a big, it was like a field. It wasn't even a parking lot. And it was very narrow. And they tell me that over 200,000 people were there. And it was broadcast to the 17 Iron Curtain, as they used to call those countries, nations in Europe and Eastern Europe. And it was pretty intense, I must say. The hotel was drab. It was Spartan. We had my daughter was 2 years old, not even 2. Yes, she was a year old. My daughter Allie was a year old, and she was there with us. And it was difficult. It was a thrill to be playing there in many ways, not knowing, of course, that the wall would come down in November, I believe, in 1989. It was incredible, and the freedom that was afforded the East Germans, particularly the East Berliners, as it has come, is just a marvelous thing. And we got to witness why that happened before it happened. We opened the show, I remember, with Badlands, and I do believe, I don't know if it's on YouTube, but I do believe Bruce made a beautiful opening soliloquy about the walls that separate us, without being too specific. And then we went into Badlands. It was a very, very moving experience to play in East Berlin in 1988. From Chris Douch. He's from Oxford, England. Can you tell us about your experience of guest appearing on The Simpsons? How did that come about? And what was it like recording with the cast? Well, Chris, I was honored to be a character on The Simpsons. I was on a couple of cartoon shows back in the early 2000s. And of course, as fans of late night know, Conan was a major presence on The Simpsons before, I believe, he got to Saturday Night Live and then to the late night program. So they had a show they wrote that involved me being on it. You know, playing the drums as a Simpson character, driving a car as a Simpson character, and the episode was called "Love is a Many Splintered Thing," and it was a lot of fun because, you know, I had to use my own voice, and it was a voiceover, so unfortunately it was just me and a recording engineer in a studio in New York City, and then they get the voice, and then they sync the cartoon lips to the voice. But at the time I did it, I can remember my stock going way up at home with my son Jay. That was big, being on The Simpsons. This is from Alan Inkpen. Did you enjoy You're Never Alone with a Schizophrenic sessions with Ian Hunter? I did. I love your playing on it, and the drum sound is massive. You're more upfront than most of the E Street stuff, which of course I also love. Well, thank you, Alan. Interesting thing about that record, we rehearsed it in White Plains, New York, and what I remember about the rehearsals was, of course, it was me, it was Roy Bittan, Gary Talent, Ian Hunter, it was his record, and Mick Ronson. And there was a beam in the studio, this little rehearsal studio, and I smacked my head right into this beam, full force. And I got a shiner on my forehead, a lump, that just lasted for weeks. And a couple days later, we went to the studio, a new studio in New York City that was called the Power Station. And it was on West 53rd Street, and I'd never been there, nobody had ever been there. And I set the drums up in Studio A, and I tuned them, and right away, the drums sounded unbelievable. Unbelievable, big, massive, resonant. And I'd never experienced that in any studio before, where they just sounded great. So we did the record, and that was an interesting record because they had recorded a bunch of songs earlier with several other drummers, and they asked me to replace all the drums, which I did. And you know, the time was a little up and down on these tracks, and I actually became pretty adept at replacing drummers on drum tracks that were a little unsteady. I had an ability to kind of split the difference, sort of average out where they were going and go with the movement without completely going with it. And that was I think on 3 songs. I believe Cleveland Rocks was one of those songs. But that was a fun record. Ian Hunter, incredibly talented guy. Mick Ronson, you know, legendary English musicians. And we had a lot of fun. Didn't take very long to do it. You know, it was pretty much all live in the studio. But playing in the Power Station that first night, I remember the next day calling Bruce and saying, I played in the studio last night that has the drum sound we're looking for. And in all modesty, I must say that I think that may have been one of the reasons we ended up at the Power Station recording The River. And the engineer on Ian Hunter's record was Bob Clearmountain. And I believe Bob engineered the first record we did at the Power Station, which might have been Roulette. You have to check me on that. Okay, 2 more, and then we're going to pick it up next week. This is from Brad Foley from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I had the pleasure of seeing the E Street Band's first true stadium show at the Carrier Dome in Syracuse on the Born in the USA tour. It was December, by the way. Was there apprehension or nerves backstage about making the leap from arenas to stadiums back in January 1985? Well, Brad, that's a great question because, you know, you go from playing 18, 20,000 seats to playing the Carrier Dome as I think 45,000, an indoor stadium, thankfully, because it was December in Syracuse. But actually, it was a bigger transition, I believe, in going from the places we used to play before arenas, which were large theaters and war memorial auditoriums, many of which were built in the 30s. They seated 5,000, 6,000. So speaking for myself, and I'm sure we all felt it to a degree, it was a bigger leap going from these large theaters, 7,000 for example, to 20,000. The first arena we played was the Spectrum the old Spectrum in Philadelphia on the Darkness tour. And you got used to it pretty quickly because a stadium I should say, doesn't look that much different than an arena. It's just bigger. And once you get over the initial sort of, oh my gosh, look at all those people, and then you start playing festivals where you've got several 100,000 people, what you have to do, as you do in sports, and I've talked to professional athletes, is you may feel a little shot of adrenaline when you first go out there, but that really quickly passes because you're there to do a job. And if you don't focus on the job, in my case, you're going to get an eye, and you don't want the eye. And so you can't let the energy and the enormity of the crowd affect your the way you're performing. So I like to say that the adrenaline stops at my wrists. But it's a thrill. No, I still absolutely get a thrill. And during Ramrod, the song Ramrod, that's the one where I'll take the opportunity, and the rare opportunity, to sometimes just look around and see all the people groove into this song. It's a crowd favorite. I'll be like, wow, I can't believe this. I mean, it's such a privilege to be playing in these big places for people who really want to be there and appreciate it. And of course, during this terrible crisis we're going through, we all miss playing for you and live, and I miss playing with my jukebox and my guys playing in the clubs and the small theaters we play. And as soon as it's safe for you and us to go back to playing, we're going to be doing that for sure, because there's no substitute for the live concert experience. And and I used to, when I was a kid, think of a concert as something, we performers did for you. And then I recall on one of our tours, Bruce explained the concept of being in concert to the audience. You are in concert with the audience. It's you and the audience. You're one. You're one living, breathing, rocking out organism. And when he said that, I said, yeah, that's exactly right. And we have the best audiences, in my view, that I've ever seen anywhere. And I'm not just saying that. I'm pouring out my heart to you now because I miss you all, and I want to tell you how I feel. It is a privilege. I've been doing it all my life. I'm 69 years old. I want to do it again. And I want to play the drums again, whether it's in a club, a theater, a war memorial, an arena, a stadium, a festival. Because in my soul, that's what I do. I'm a drummer. And I'm also doing this little bit for you guys because I can't be with you. I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm going to wish you all the best. I'm going to ask you to stay safe and continue to observe what they're telling us to do as we reopen the society. And listen, we all are very strong, and we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. And when we get through it together, we, as Bruce has been saying, we are going to have a hell of a party. So take care, and this is Max Weinberg. I'll see you next time.